Yeah, today on Reading Rainbow of Death, I'm talking to John. We're going to talk about Radio Free Conspiracy Theory. I'm going to let him. I was on Spooklights. I think that just went up.
It was up today.
Today, which by the time this airs is a few weeks ago, where I kind of talk. I talk about my end of it, right?
Talk.
And so we're going to talk to John now and let John kind of talk about writing a music album and kind of what that was like for him. So
check it out.
Here it comes.
Take a look, it's in our book, a reading rainbow.
All right, on what is going to be the last installment of Reading Rainbow of Death for a little while, I'm taking a break, try to catch up on some reading. Most of the people that I have interviewed have wrote new books, and I want to make sure I'm reading them and just some other stuff. So I'm going to do a little break, and we're just going to focus on the movies. On this last episode for a while, though, we're talking to Jonathan Raab, author of the Hillbilly Moonshine Massacre, The Lesser Swamp Gods of Little Dixie, and many other great things, and editor-in-chief at Muzzleland Press, and also the man who helped out with Mississippi Bones' new album, co-wrote it with us, Radio Free Conspiracy Theory. Thanks for joining us today, John.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Not a problem. Always a pleasure. So last time yours was the longest interview I think I've ever done. We talked about kind of...
Sorry about that.
No, that's not a problem. We talked about kind of where your inspiration for horror comes from, your character, Kodo, Sheriff Kodo, who I, of course, love. Obviously, I wanted to do a whole album about him. So this time we're just going to kind of talk about the album, maybe where it started, what your feelings on how it came out, things that you want to add about it. So first off, if you want to explain kind of how the whole thing came about, you can go ahead and do that.
Yeah, sure. I'll be happy to give my perspective, and I'm sure you've got some other facts to fill in. But I guess it all really starts with discovering Mississippi Bones. I think it was on a Pandora station I had created. I think it was like a Clutch station or something. And you guys had came up, and I remember liking the sound and the music and your vocals, and then realizing that you guys were singing about Star Trek and Ghostbusters, and specifically Ghostbusters 2 for the Venkman song. And really getting into your music, checking out your Bandcamp page, and finding the albums on YouTube and listening to them, and buying your work. And I was in the middle of creating a anthology called Terror in 16 Bits, which is available on our website and on Amazon, which is video game based horror. And you had a song on your album last year called. And I'm totally blanking on this now, but
2600 AD.
Yeah, 2600 AD. I'm sorry. Yeah, and it was about a bunch of classic arcade games. And I remember reaching out to your Facebook page via direct message and said, "Hey, I'd love to, pay for the rights to, throw you some bills or something to use it in a book trailer." The book trailer never materialized, unfortunately, because my house was destroyed by a hailstorm, and so was my car, and that kind of took over my life. It was just a miracle that I finished the anthology, but we kept talking, and it had turned out that you had read Creeping Waves, which was a book that I had edited by Matthew M. Bartlett, and you ended up reading my novel, The Hillbilly Moonshine Massacre, and The Lesser Swamp Gods of Little Dixie. I think you read them out of order, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is fine. I wrote Lesser Swamp Gods to be read, by itself. And I remember sort of idly, I probably had a few drinks in me on Facebook, like, "Hey man, if you ever want to do a Sheriff Kodo song, you have my blessing." And I think, your response was that you had been, thinking about doing something like that. And you had so much fun writing that song that you decided, hey, I don't want to do just one song. I want to do a whole concept album based on Sheriff Kodo and that character, which I was floored by because obviously I enjoyed your music quite a bit. And, I was expecting, maybe one song, and that would be really cool. That would be a real highlight of sort of my burgeoning writing career is this band I really like. would make a song based on a character I wrote. But we kept talking, and you kind of pulled out song ideas from me. You were like, "Hey, I'm thinking about GMOs in food." Or the Order of the Night Moose, which is sort of the villainous secret society that shows up in a lot of my fiction. And I remember you would ask me questions, and then I would answer basically as Sheriff Kodo. I was typing out what he would say about certain subjects, and that kind of became the basis for lyrics. And the music, obviously, that the band produced was just great. And then you would send me files of lyrics like, "Hey, here's this song." And I would go through and provide notes or edits, and then you'd go through and edit that again, and until we kind of got to this like happy soupy medium between the ideas behind the songs and what worked for the band. So that was a really cool process. What I really enjoyed about it is seeing your take on some of these ideas, that we sort of collaboratively came up with, tying them back into the Sheriff Kodo character, and then ultimately going beyond just making songs and making a concept album where, and I don't remember if it was your idea or mine, which is kind of the refrain I've had for this whole album experience, which is a good thing. I don't know whose idea it was, but we're like, hey, why don't we just make this Sheriff Kodo's last radio show? So we'll have sketches in between each song. And, sitting down to write Sheriff Kodo again after I hadn't done so in, about a year and a half, was great. So writing this call-in format show, scripts for people calling in and presenting Sheriff Kodo with various topics, and him going on some rants, writing it like a radio show. It really comes across as sort of a radio drama or play, which was a lot of fun to write.
Yeah, and it was, I know on my end, I was super excited about it, but when we finished, like, I realized the first time I listened to it, it's like, wow, this is different. This is not like a normal album. And that was one thing, I thought we did a great job on it, but then the nerves hit me a little bit after that when we got it all done.
Yeah.
Because you had done such a fantastic job writing the radio bits. I was like, this is a radio show. This isn't an album. But so did you have any? I know I did. I had some pre-release jitters. Did you have any jitters? How the overall thing would be accepted?
Oh yeah, 100%. And just to kind of back up real quick, in case some of your listeners and viewers aren't familiar with the Sheriff Kodo character, basically he was a independent ufological paranormal researcher who got elected to a backwater county in upstate New York to the office of sheriff, based on a paranormal defense and anti-goblinry platform. So basically, picture pre-Trump Alex Jones with Hunter S. Thompson and Bill Murray kind of thrown in the blender, and that's the character you're dealing with here. So he's got a radio show that's a call-in show that's like sort of like Coast to Coast AM type of situation where he's talking about a paranormal topic of the week, and people are calling in locally and eventually nationally to talk to him about these topics. So this show ended up taking place after the two books I had written. But I feel like we did a pretty good job where if you were not at all familiar with the character, this can serve as an introduction to the character. I think pretty, right off the bat. But to that end, yeah, I was a little bit nervous because, I liked your music so much, and I was a fan of the band well before I became friends with you. I was worried that your fans might not react positively to it, or they might be like, well, the music's fine, but this stuff gets in the way. The sketches get in the way. But thankfully, all the reviews I've seen, whether people posting on your Bandcamp page or the professional reviews, people seem to like it all as a whole product, which is really cool. So I was definitely nervous about that, but I'm also very relieved that people are reacting to it very positively.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of great reactions. I think I told you, but the one that made me feel the best was someone was like, no, it sounds like Mississippi Bones, and I had got back with them and it was like, well, yeah, but all the radio sketches, like I was afraid that was going to throw people off. And he's like, no, that sounds like Mississippi Bones. The humor is there, the subjects are there. And then one other person said, I'm surprised. They're like, the only thing that's surprising about this album is that we didn't see it coming, because if you look back, it just feels like the next step. And those two little comments, I think, made me feel the best about everything, because it just apparently felt like the next step. And
right.
And to have that with someone new who was a large part of the album, to get that feel that it is new but not, I think was a really big thing and rare. I don't know that you find that. You were able to bring a whole nother dimension to what we did without making it feel like anything different.
Yeah, and I think that's not totally surprising to me, because to be honest, like I think I told you this, like there were parts of Lesser Swamp Gods of Little Dixie when I was writing that book. I would listen to your music. This is before we ever connected. I was listening to Mississippi Bones music and sort of being inspired by that in terms of like, pacing or a certain turn of phrase that would catch in my head, that type of thing. So in fact, I think there's a song you did on one of your albums. I don't remember if it was it's the one with the riverboat album cover.
Yeah, self-titled.
Yeah, self-titled, right? So there's a song in there about something about Eyes of Jade Fire or something like that.
Yeah, it's Big Trouble in Little China song.
Yeah. For whatever reason, that song was a big inspiration coming up with the character of Chloe in Lesser Swamp Gods of Little Dixie. I don't know, something about that idea. So your work had sort of been influencing mine, and obviously, even before I met you, I knew that your interest in D&D and Ghostbusters and all that stuff, like Star Trek, like obviously we were operating on a similar wavelength. So I didn't feel like it was that much of a leap to create something that would hopefully fit, the established Mississippi Bones, like, ethos. So.
Yeah. Was it weird? Because this was out of your territory, of course. You got to do what you do in it, but was it weird trying to make a jump to make something your writing kind of make it work with a music with an album, as opposed to, or did you just approach it as, no, I'm gonna write and let's just hope this blends together well? I'll do my thing, they do their thing, and we'll just shove it together and see how it works.
I mean, it was certainly a challenge, but I think, like, speaking with you pretty frequently, and to be totally honest, I wasn't as available as I should have been, just because I was dealing with any number of personal crises and stuff last year when we were kind of putting this thing together. But it felt like a challenge, but at the same time, because our sensibilities matched up, and because you as a lyricist were bringing so much to the table, like, hey, I've got an idea about genetic manipulation, or I've got an idea about Planet X Nibiru. Right. So like you were bringing enough to it that I didn't feel like I had all the pressure that I had to come up with all of the ideas. And then, you sharing the music with me, you'd send over the initial samples from Dusty or whatever, and just being floored by the music, and already, starting to imagine what the story, the lyrics accompanying that music might be. That made it a lot easier. So there was definitely some trepidation, but I never felt totally unconfident, just because the nature of the collaboration just seemed so confident from the band's end.
Yeah, so it's organic enough you didn't feel like you really had to tweak anything about what you do.
Yeah. I mean, there was a few times you would send something over, like, well, Sheriff Kodo wouldn't say that, or he wouldn't put it that way. But then again, there were times where I was like, hey, say this, and you're like, no. so it was a good back and forth.
This very special reading Rainbow of Death with Jonathan Raab will be continued on the next episode of the Last Roundup Horror Show. Make sure to download Radio Free Conspiracy Theory at mississippibones.bandcamp.com.
Take a look, it's in our book, a reading rainbow.
Last time on the Reading Rainbow of Death.
We're talking to Jonathan Raab.
I guess it all really starts with discovering Mississippi Bones. I remember reaching out to your Facebook page via direct message and said, "Hey, I'd love to, pay for the rights to, throw you some bills or something to use in a book trailer." And you ended up reading my novel, The Hillbilly Moonshine Massacre, and The Lesser Swamp Gods of Little Dixie. I remember sort of idly, I probably had a few drinks in me on Facebook, like, "Hey, man, if you ever want to do a Sheriff Kodo song, you have my blessing." And you had so much fun writing that song that you decided, hey, I don't want to do just one song. I want to do a whole concept album based on Sheriff Kodo and that character.
I know on my end, I was super excited about it, but when we finished, like, I realized the first time I listened to it, it's like, wow, this is different. This is not like a normal album. And that was one thing. Like, I thought we did a great job on it, but then the nerves hit me a little bit after that when we got it all done. But the one that made me feel the best was someone was like, no, it sounds like Mississippi Bones, and I got back with him and was like, well, yeah, but I mean all the radio sketches. Like, I was afraid that was going to throw people off. And he's like, no, that sounds like Mississippi Bones. The humor is there, the subjects are there, and then one other person said, I'm surprised. They're like, the only thing that's surprising about this album is that we didn't see it coming, because if you look back, it just feels like the next step.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really proud of how well all the sketches turned out, and I think a lot of that has to do with your performance as Sheriff Kodo, which I think is great. And we kind of went back and forth, and we even tried to. I think I remember at one time you reached out to Ken Forey, like trying to get his agent, which would have been perfect. And then us kind of like, well, hey, I think Jared can do it, and you had sent me over a few voice samples, and I was kind of giving you pointers on how he should sound, and ultimately I feel like you really came up with a great interpretation of the character, and I just love how the album begins with Open Air, and then how that easily transitions into A Paranoiac's Farewell, and then moves on from there, and getting to appear on the album as myself, playing a character of myself with Tom Breen on Occult to Programmers, and moving in from there. I just feel like it starts really strong, and it just really follows through. And by the time it ends, it's creating these threads toward the next Sheriff Kodo book, which is a lot of fun. And in fact, I've already started getting the stories in from the contributing writers, and I've started writing the, S1E2, the first story, the first episode of that book. And then it picks up that night after this recording, which is great. I got to say, though, probably some of my favorite stuff on here, though, is Devilry in the Blues and Little Dixie. You've got someone playing my Preacher Jim character and Chloe from Lester Swamp God's Little Dixie, and it's just a really powerful song. And people keep saying, like, hey, Sheriff Kodo should be a Netflix show. Like, hey, Netflix, I come cheap. But if that ever would. I could see that being a season 2 of the show, and like I would love for that song. I'm just picturing that song as being tied to that. I love the Order of the Night Moose song, which connects to a short story I wrote, and Ancient Astronauts and Alien Allegories is a favorite. And I gotta say, the song you collaborated with Matthew M. Bartlett, WXXT.
Yeah.
That's depending on my mood, that's my top song or top 3 songs of the album. Just because it's so creepy and sort of slow and melodic, and it's got this like very measured, confident pace to it, but it also feels very metal at the same time. So I'm a big fan of pretty much the whole album. But yeah, there's a few of my favorites that I've just mentioned. I do find myself listening to frequently. Although I will admit, and I've seen some comments in reviews like, hey, the sketches are great, but you don't need to listen to them every time if you want to be in the backyard doing work. Actually, I listen to this album on my way to work, and I actually usually skip the sketches because I've listened to them a few times, but it is fun to go back and revisit it from time to time.
Yeah, and one of the things I think from that, why it turned out that way, because that's one of the things I was worried about. It's like, how's this going to play as a full album listenability wise? We made sure to write it so you can pull the songs out, but the not something to throw on when you're working in your backyard unless you pull the sketches out. Well, I think one of the big things about that is the earlier reviews we were getting from it, people were having trouble saying what their favorite song was. It's like, oh, I'm gonna have to go back and listen to it again to pick out a song, because kind of between the lyrics and the sketches, we tied everything together so good. Like they got wrapped in the story. So it had the radio drama aspect. So I know some people have said that about it, but I've really took it as a compliment because they've seemed to enjoy the overall story so much. It was hard to just focus in on one song, be like, no, that was easily the best song, because they'd have to go back and be like, I gotta go back and listen, because I remember the overall, the kind of the radio and the music together. I remember the Nibiru was awesome. I don't remember the song, but the overall, or the space vampires at the end, that was awesome. But the song was, so I think part of that came from just we did a really good job of presenting whatever it is that we had made on this, whatever you want to call it. It really is half radio show, half rock opera, maybe. I don't know. But
yeah. And I still, when I do go back and listen to the sketches, I find myself chuckling at things like, Jeff joins a cult. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that stuff makes me laugh every time. So, which is a lot of fun. And what's cool for me is that there's a lot of like little references in here to Sheriff Koto originated as a character in these backyard monster movies I used to make like 15 years ago.
Yep.
So like, well, not quite that long ago, but and then sharing this with friends and family who were a part of that, so long ago. There's like little references and in-jokes in there, but at the same time, I feel like it's accessible and surface level enough in terms of its understandability that hopefully people who've never even encountered the character will get it and develop an affection for it and the character. And definitely sales have increased a little bit since the album's come out, because I've seen plenty of people posting like, hey, I want to check out these books because I like this character so much.
Yeah, and I hope it does work for you. That was really my overall agenda. I read these books and just didn't have anyone to talk to them about. Clearly, if you listen to our band, you know that I am a fan of sci-fi and horror and fiction, and I am a fan of talking about them. So my real behind-the-scenes agenda was, I'm going to write this book and hopefully people who like our music will, or I'm going to write this album, people who like our music will listen to it, and then they'll go read the book so I can talk to somebody about these books. So it was a little selfish, but it seems to be working. So
yeah, and vice versa. I think people who sort of enjoy the type of books that I write, sort of the gonzo horror fiction. I'm not afraid to have fun. I like scary stuff, but I mostly want people to have a good time reading these madcap zany adventures. A drug using county sheriff fighting the New World Order, UFOs and demons. I think if you're into that sort of thing, you're also going to like the music of Mississippi Bones. Not just this album, but pretty much your whole catalog.
Yeah, they definitely married together really well on this one. So looks like we're coming into about 23 minutes. I know Frankie likes me to keep it 15. This is going to be a double episode. Somewhere about 10 minutes ago, you started listening on our second episode. I don't know where, but things coming up for you, announcements, new works, things going on. Go ahead and let everybody know what to look forward to.
Yeah, so check out Radio Free Conspiracy Theory from Mississippi Bones, co-written by myself and also featuring, writing from Matthew M. Bartlett and Sean M. Thompson, and performances by, Orford Parish Books editor Tom Breen and my old childhood friend Colin Scharf. We got him on a track, which was a lot of fun.
Both of who, not to cut you off, but both of who are great. Those two sketches, I think, are two of my favorite. Colin sounds like Jeff Goldblum, and it was fantastic. I don't think I ever messaged him, so you'll have to tell him I loved his part. So
I'll let him know. Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off, but go on.
And it's funny, the character he plays, which also appears in the novels, he's also continuing with that character in a feature film that he's putting together about that Minnesotan cryptid that he mentions in that sketch. So be looking for that movie, The Marmol Chronicles, coming out probably next year or so. But as far as, checking out my work, check out the Hillbilly Moonshine Massacre and the Lesser Swamp Gods of Little Dixie. You can read them in any order. I price them at 99 cents for Kindle. The paperbacks are pretty much dirt cheap, likewise through the Muzzleland Press Store Envy page. So even if you hate them, hey, you're only out a few bucks. Not that bad. Also, I am an editor, so the most recent anthology from Muzzleland Press is Terror in 16 Bits. It's a video game-inspired horror, so if you like Castlevania, Resident Evil, Silent Hill. That's definitely going to be an anthology for you. And hopefully here in the next couple months, I'm hoping by the end of summer, but it might sort of bleed into the beginning of fall. I've got a new novel coming out through Turn to Ash Publications. It's called Camp Ghoul Mountain Part 6, the official novelization. The elevator pitch for that is back in the day, in the 80s, they used to make novelizations of movies and horror movies. So, you might have been a young kid who's 12 who can't go see the new Friday the 13th movie, but you can read the novelization. So I wrote a novelization of a slasher movie that doesn't actually exist. So that slasher movie is, Camp Ghoul Mountain Part 6, which was supposed to be a by-the-numbers, run-of-the-mill slasher movie, but the director they hired fancied himself a counterculturalist auteur. So he slips a lot of weird subversive messages into the film. So it's one half novelization of this movie, and then the other half is the history behind the making of the film, complete with footnotes and sort of biographical sketches of the producer and the director and how they butted heads and how the film became a cult classic sensation and how the director ended up founding a magic mushroom cult in the mid-90s and what happens to him and how the film is supposedly, according to conspiracy theorists, a prophecy for a harbinger of America's doom as payment for all of her many sins. So if that convoluted mess of an elevator pitch appeals to you in any way, check out Camp Ghoul Mountain Part 6. Should be out in a few months.
I am incredibly excited for that one, by the way. There's so many over the top and things and stuff that I love all just put together. I can't wait to see you pull all that together. All right, well, and there's where you can, or there's what to expect from John Raab coming up. Where can they find you at, I guess?
Check out muzzlelandpress.com. It's been pretty quiet as a blog, but I do post updates whenever we post a new episode from Spooklights, our semi-monthly podcast-ish, where you can find frequent guests such as Jared Collins. Basically, we discuss independent horror literature and interview authors or talk about horror movies and that sort of thing. Kind of got a bit of a irregular schedule, but we usually get out at least 1 or 2 episodes a month. And they're a lot of fun. Everything from interviews with noted authors to let's plays of the Delta Green horror role-playing game, which we've got a few more of those coming up as well. So check out Spooklights as well.
All right. Well, thanks, John. This is, like I said, going to be the last episode of Reading Rainbow of Death for a while. Some books are going to be coming out, and I'm going to be reading, and maybe sometime in the fall I'm going to pick it back up. Maybe in the winter, who knows. But that's kind of all I'm doing for a little while, so I appreciate everyone who has been listening, and I know John plugged his Spooklights podcast. If you are looking to get into weird and indie horror fiction, that is where most of the names that I picked out come from, and it makes up a lot of my reading list. So, and as he said, Muzzleland Press at their .com, go check him out. A lot of the authors in his anthologies are fantastic as well. He has a great eye for horror and kind of who I have trusted to navigate me through these weird waters. So go check it out. And John, thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. So do I get a prize if I stay as your most appeared guest on this show? Do I got to keep coming back, or
you get a free copy of Radio Free Conspiracy Theory?
Oh, great. Awesome.
The vinyl will be coming out later this year too, so you can have a free copy of that as well, that I already promised you.
Yeah, I'll probably hang that on my wall. That's some good looking cover art by Jared Collins. I kind of dig it. So
all right, well, thanks a lot, John.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yep.